pieces on the board. So white had to open up the king side with f6, queen h4 in order to prevail. So
Mm-hmm.
it's important to identify weak squares, but it's also important to know what to do once you occupy the weak square, because often in and of itself it won't win you the game.
Right.
So okay, well, now let's look at something. So this is kind of a bare bones example. Let's look at something a little more complicated now. So let me set it up real fast.
What was that game from or of?
Oh, it was just a game of smooth gloves against some random dude. I mean, obviously black didn't play so great because he lost in 25 moves, but
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, knowing how to take advantage of weak squares like that was something that all the great Russian grandmasters knew how to do. So, okay, so I think this is the question. Okay, so yeah, this is it. Oh, I forgot to give white a queen. That might help. Okay, so yeah, so here we go. Okay, so now again, let's try to identify weak squares. So so we're looking at this from black's point of view. So I'll flip the board for you. So what's the weak squares that we're looking at here? And it's black's move, by the way.
It's black's move. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so again, let's try to identify weak squares. So what's the weak squares?
D4 is pretty weak.
Yep, that's true. So d4 is weak because, again, there's no pawn on e2, c2, e3, or c3 that can challenge that square. So if black were to put a piece on d4, it would be unassailable. At least, I mean, unassailable as far as pawns are concerned.
Right.
Okay. So anything else that stands out to you?
Well, I mean, I guess D3 in the same idea.
Yeah. But yeah, of course.
Anything else but the F3?
Yeah, F3 too, sure. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. These squares are a little bit weak because white played G3 but has no e pawn. So when white played G3 but has no e pawn, F3 becomes weak. So that's also a very good point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else that stands out?
Oh, is there more?
Well, just something else that's not necessarily a weak square, but it's an outpost.
Well, B2 is weak, but an outpost.
Yeah. So an outpost means something that's defended by a pawn.
Right. B5, B4. I don't know, anything that can't be kicked by another pawn, but
well, think about it not necessarily in raw terms, but something looking at the position.
Yeah, I guess C5
yeah,
maybe.
Exactly. Right. So this is an outpost because although it can be kicked by this pawn, right now this pawn is helping to defend that square.
Right.
So if black were to ever get a knight on c5, it would pretty much be an unassailable outpost, because for white to kick it, white would have to play some combination of a3 and b4. But always note that if white ever plays a3 in this position, black always has a4, and then this post does become an unassailable post, because if white ever plays b4, there's always an en passant. So
right.
in actuality, for white to ever play b4, he'd have to play b3, then a3, then b4. So it's quite an excursion, for him to chase a piece away from c5. So c5 is an outpost.
Okay.
It's not. I mean, it's weak also because this pawn has passed through it, and this pawn again on b2. It's gonna take a while for it to be able to get to b4 effectively. So, but yeah, the main weak squares are indeed d4 and f3. But also take note of c5 because that pawn on a5 does help protect it. If this pawn was on a7, then yeah, c5 wouldn't be considered really anything, because b4 would come on pretty much anything. But since the pawn's on a5, c5 is worth noting. Okay, so anyway, it is black's move here. So Knowing what we know about weak squares, what what should we do here?
Um, hmm. I guess. Well, we've got a light squared bishop, and that can't really use any of those.
Right, that's a good point. Yeah, because our pawns are mostly on dark squares. So usually when you have pawns on dark squares, your outpost will also be on dark squares, since that's what the pawns will be supporting. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Do we want to try to reroute the bishop? The knight, and get into the game?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Knight g7 looks a little backwards, but if it's a closed game and you want to improve your position, maybe knight g7 to f5 and then d4 is the idea, or
Yeah, that's a good rerouting. Just don't forget that white's attacking our bishop right now.
right.
So we need to do something with the bishop first. But yeah, I mean, you're right that we want to reroute our knight, because right now it's kind of on the rim.
I
But the
guess
question is first,
right.
what should we do with the bishop?
I guess we should take the knight because it's defending the d4 square and that makes it weaker.
Right, exactly,
What?
exactly. So white played bishop takes f3. Okay, so now, or sorry, black played bishop takes f3. So now as white, which um, which piece should he recapture with?
Hmm.
Going by exactly what you just said, you know.
Right.
So you know what black's plan is supposed to be. So how should white recapture in order to kind of frustrate the plan as much as possible?
If he captures with the bishop, the queen is still protecting d4, even though it's the queen and it's a major piece, and you're not going to capture a knight with it. But
right, you wanna more do something that frustrates black's plan of rerouting the knight more so than do something that will defend the square, because obviously you can't defend the square anymore.
Right.
Now that the knight's gone.
Well, if you take with the queen, you're offering the queen exchange, and he has to do that first. Oh, but if you take with the bishop, if you take with the bishop, he can't really come to f5 if you move it to g4.
Okay, you almost got it. You almost got it. So you're right. Taking with the bishop is best, because after knight g7, now instead of bishop g4, which runs into h5, white's going to play bishop e4. And now the bishop is on a good square. Because notice, this square is actually a weakness for black, right? Because there's no pawn that can come attack it, because there's no pawn in the f-file. So this bishop controls f5.
True.
And so now if black were to ever play knight f5, white would instantly capture, because he doesn't allow this knight to get to d4.
Right.
So bishop takes is correct, because he wants to put his bishop on e4, and then eventually queenside castle, and then get his rook on f1, and then play f4, stuff like that. But more importantly, he wants to stop black from routing the knight. Unfortunately for white, he took back with the queen. And now, unfortunately for him, it's going to be much harder for him to stop this rerouting. So, so the first question is, should black exchange queens here?
Well, if he does, he gets the bishop in the same place.
Right.
So, where else would it go? I don't know where else it would go. G7.
Well, we actually want to help support. So, this bishop would still be able to stop this knight from coming to f5 on d3.
Right.
So we want to frustrate bishop d3. So we play queen to e7. So now if white plays bishop d3, you have e4 winning a piece, forking queen. But of course, white won't do that. But now we have a plan of going knight g7, knight f5, and knight d4. So, but yeah, we don't want to trade queens, because having the queens on is actually going to help us in this position, because it'll help with the attack. So, so white plays queen e4, and now what does black do? We pretty much already said it. So.
Right. So knight g7.
Yeah, exactly. And notice now how white could play g4 here. Okay, but now what new weak squares come about from G4?
Well, F3 is pretty weak.
Okay, but well, F3 was weak before, right?
Right.
But what's the main problem with G4?
F4?
Yeah, exactly. So notice that by trying to fix some weaknesses, every time you move a pawn, you're creating new weaknesses. So now H4 and F4 are both weak. And also this pawn on F2 is very weak. So now black has a simple plan of just playing Rook F8 and Rook F4, and white's in some real trouble. So basically you're cutting off your nose to spite your face if you play G4. So white instead tried to get something going on the king side and played H4. So, so what does black do here?
Well, then just continue with the plan and go knight F5.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, there's no reason not to. I mean, white's not threatening anything. Okay, so now white goes H5. So, so here the idea now is if this knight moves, then this pawn is hanging. But the problem with H5 is that again it's weakening the G5 square. It's also weakening. It's basically not doing anything constructive for white because this open file is not going to ever be a problem for black, as you'll soon see. But okay, so where should black go here? So notice that he can't move his knight because of the pawn's hanging on G6.
Right. Can you bring your queen in?
Okay, to what square?
Nothing besides G5?
Yep. No, that's exactly right. So queen
Okay.
G5 is actually a multi-purpose move. So not only does it stop queenside castling, now it's illegal, it also defends this pawn, and it also brings the queen in to attack this pawn. So if white were ever to try to play F4 or something, then G3 would just be hopelessly weak. So the queen is commanding a lot of squares, and it's also pretty safe. It's also pretty safe because there's no way to
dark
attack
square
it because it's on a
bishop.
dark square, and all of white's pieces can really only attack light squares. So
Okay, gotcha.
so yeah, queen G5 is absolutely correct. But again, we're still trying to further our plan of getting this knight to D4, which is our ultimate goal. But now we're helping to defend this pawn. So since white can't queenside castle, he plays Rook D1, and now black plays Rook F8. So he just is going to get his rook on this open F file. I mean, this knight's always going to come to D4. There's no need to hurry. You might as well improve the placement of your rooks first. So now white plays Queen G4, which is probably a weak move because now that we're guaranteed that our knight's going to get to D4, it's easier to win this position from an endgame as opposed to a middle game. So black, doesn't hesitate, trades queens, and gets his knight to D4. Okay, so now again, of course, we have a situation. I mean, if we contrast it to what it was like here, this looks kind of messy, but here it looks very simple. This knight on D4 is pretty much rules the board. But again, nothing definite has been won yet. I mean, we're not up material or anything yet. So now the question is, again, how do we win this position? So white played King F1. So he wants to try to get his king out. So he wants to play King G2 and then get his rooks connected, since he wasn't able to castle. And he wasn't able to play King D2 because this pawn on F2 was hanging. So he needs to keep his king close to the pawn. So so what should black do here?
He might as well strengthen his position, double his rooks, Rook F6.
Okay, so Rook F6 and Rook AF8 does make sense, but unfortunately, just the two rooks alone on this pawn aren't going to be enough to win it because this rook can always go to D2 and white can just shuffle back and forth. Okay. So oftentimes in these positions, we need to create weaknesses on both sides of the board in order to realize our advantage. So right now, you're right that this pawn is a weakness, but unfortunately, we don't have enough force in this position to win it to win it by force.
Right.
White can always, get more defenders on it than we can attackers. Because really, we can only attack with our 2 rooks. Like our knight, we don't want to move from this comfy square. So even
Hmm.
it's going to be almost impossible for us to move our knight to like e4, for example, to attack the pawn a third time. So more important